Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. In just a few hours from now, Army Sergeant Bo Bergdahl is coming home. The freed Taliban prisoner of war is flying from the U.S. military hospital in Germany to the Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, Texas, and is expected to arrive sometime after midnight. What a homecoming awaits him. Bergdahl has been called without any definitive evidence thus far, a deserter, a traitor, possibly a jihadi in the formulation of one Fox News headline. And this is what he will wake up to tomorrow after 5 years of being held by the Taliban in what can only be, we imagine, be horrific circumstances. Much of the anger directed at Bo Bergdahl from pundits and demagogues isn't actually at Bo Bergdahl. It is anger at the end of this long period of war and what the end of it looks like. What the end of it looks like is 5 Taliban commanders who had been taken off the battlefield within months of 9/11 heading back to Qatar and eventually back to Afghanistan as the U.S. prepares to end its combat mission. What the end of this period of war looks like today are scenes in Iraq, a country that may be disintegrating before our very eyes again. This is what is happening in Iraq right now. Hundreds of thousands of people are fleeing their homes after a Sunni militant group seized key towns in northern Iraq and pushed on towards Baghdad. The militant group goes by the acronym ISIS, the Islamic State in Iraq and al-Sham, and wants to make a new caliphate out of Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and the Palestinian territories. ISIS formed in April last year, growing out of al-Qaeda in Iraq, but it is so extreme that al-Qaeda has now disavowed them. The group, which claims to have militants from all around the world in its ranks, including from the U.S. and Europe, has had great military success in Syria, and now in Iraq too. In January, they seized the town of Fallujah, the site of some of the most brutal fighting between American forces and insurgents in 2004. Then, on Tuesday, Iraq's second largest city, Mosul, which fell to American forces within months of the 2003 invasion, also surrendered to ISIS. 2 divisions of Iraqi soldiers, around 30,000 men, fled, abandoning their weapons and uniforms when just 800 insurgents overran the city. ISIS then imposed a harsh legal code in Mosul, telling women to wear wide clothes and only step outside if absolutely necessary. Fighters have looted millions of dollars in military equipment across the north, prompting desperate measures from the Iraqi government.
Today, the Iraqi Air Force bombed what appeared to be their own bases and aircraft hangars in Mosul in what seems to be a scorched earth policy.
To the north, the Iraqi army has deserted the town of Kirkuk and Kurdish forces have taken over. While to the south, ISIS fighters occupied parts of the oil refining town of Baji and rode into Saddam Hussein's hometown of Tikrit, seizing that as well. Now, they are pushing on to Baghdad.
March to Baghdad al-Rashid, the Baghdad of the Caliphate. We have a score to settle. There is an old balance with it, and we must make it even.
In Baghdad, Shiite Muslims are lining up to join the army, while the Shiite-led government is asking for U.S. help. In Washington, President Obama left on the table the potential of airstrikes against ISIS.
I don't rule out anything because we do have a stake in making sure that these jihadists are not getting a permanent foothold in either Iraq or Syria, for that matter.
Vice President Biden spoke on the phone with Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki this morning to express solidarity with Iraq, and Secretary of State Kerry promised the U.S. is taking action.
We are deeply concerned about what is happening in Iraq, and we are not concerned and waiting.
But the assurances from the White House are not enough for Republicans.
It's not like we haven't seen over the last 5 or 6 months these terrorists moving in, taking control of western Iraq. Now they've taken control of Mosul. They're 100 miles from Baghdad. And what's the president doing? Taking a nap.
11 years after President Bush took the nation to war in Iraq, the chaos in that country and the region that many warned of now seems all too real. Joining me now, NBC News foreign correspondent Ayman Mohaldin. And Ayman, can you tell us who ISIS is and how they have become so apparently fearsome and strong over the last several months?
Sure. I mean, certainly ISIS is a group that was, as you mentioned in that report, founded late last year after they broke away from al-Qaeda. Now, there are several components to the group itself. One of its largest components have been former Iraqi army members, soldiers, members of the Sunni Arab community inside Iraq itself. They have been able, over the course of the last year or so, grown their ranks, grown their numbers by tapping into social resentment in the Sunni Arab communities of the western part of the country, and that has allowed them to grow. But they now also have, in addition to that, foreign fighters that have come in by the hundreds and have joined their ranks. We've seen documentations as well as heard from fighters that have come from Europe, including places like Chechnya, Central Asia, as well as North Africa. So they also have that, but their numbers are predominantly made up of the Sunni Arab community that inhabits both the western part of Iraq as well as the Syrian population, the Sunni Arab Syrian population. So those are the ones that really make the rank and file of ISIS.
So what is next here? They now control Mosul, they control Tikrit, they are marching towards Baghdad. I guess the first question is, are they capable of taking Baghdad?
Well, the short answer to that really is no. To take control of Baghdad would be extremely difficult. They don't have the numbers. Keep in mind, ISIS is about 3,000 to about 5,000, maybe as many as 8,000. To really try to take a city in the millions and to control it would be very difficult, given the fact that it is the central power of not only the Iraqi government, but also some of the more dominant Shia militias who really want to confront ISIS. Now, what is ISIS capable of doing in the coming months? They can certainly hold on to some of the territory they have because they do have a groundswell of support among those populations, but they could certainly drag Iraq into a full-blown confrontation in sectarian warfare. We're not there just yet. This is still a bit of a political crisis, but ISIS wants to confront the Shia population of Iraq in a full-on battle so that it can then turn around and recruit more Sunni Arabs across the Arab world. This is something that they've been propagating for the last several years, and they now want to fulfill that fight and try to pitch this fight as a fight between Shias in Iraq and Iran, as well as the Sunni Arabs across the region. It's been their MO for the past several months.
And it seems the Maliki government, in being as harsh and brutal as they have been towards Sunni populations and Sunni dissidents and even peaceful Sunni protests, have played into ISIS's hands. Can the Maliki government do anything militarily here without further alienating precisely those parts of the population they need to bring back into the fold to build some kind of unified state?
Well, militarily, the one thing they can do is try to mitigate some of these arms that are falling into the hands of ISIS. We've already seen the Iraqi Air Force today try and carry out airstrikes on some of the American-built air bases that the Iraqi army took over after the Americans withdrew, and they've tried to destroy some of the aircraft, some of the Humvees, some of the heavy weapons that are now falling into the hands of ISIS. But in terms of engaging in a full-on battle, it certainly does not favor the Iraqi army for two reasons. One, they would have to fight an urban warfare where, again, it's not something they're very well trained in. And more importantly, if they are going to deploy troops from Baghdad, from the central government, to confront the Sunni Arab populations, they would be fighting against a ground-well support of the population. Right. And the population there right now is very disengaged with the Shia-led government in Baghdad. So they don't want to try to alienate them any further with more military strikes.
NBC News foreign correspondent Ayman Mohaldin, thank you. In Washington today, Speaker Boehner was certainly not the only one using the events in Iraq to attack President Obama. Some are citing the growing jihadist strength in Iraq as the latest example of the failings of the Obama administration's foreign policy and the need, once again, for U.S. intervention.
There is no scenario where we can stop the bleeding in Iraq without American air power. The Iraqi army is on the verge of collapse. I would urge the administration to get all of our people out now. I think the people in the ISIS have as part of their agenda to attack our homeland. The next 9/11 is in the making.
Joining me now, Zainab Al-Sawaj, co-founder and executive director of the American Islamic Congress. She was born in Iraq, fled the country in 1991, just returned from a visit to Iraq 3 weeks ago. Zainab, when you hear an American politician calling for airstrikes in Iraq, what is your reaction?
Certainly is not happy news to hear, but it's unfortunate. The situation in Iraq is, in the past week or so, it's been not really encouraging to see what's going on in there and how the insurgents and these jihadists took over Mosul and Tikrit and other parts of the country.
Zainab, let me ask you this: how did we get here? I mean, from your perspective, the disintegration that has led to this point. Yeah, please.
I think the situation is with the government, how the government was weak, not being able to include everyone under the umbrella. Even though the Sunni population in Iraq, they voted, they had seats in the parliament. I mean, the head of the parliament is a Sunni Arab from Mosul, and but there are a lot of negotiations and there are a lot of problems also, and these kind of problems led to the situation where we are right now, where the Al-Qaeda and these jihadists took advantage of and came to Iraq to fight that, what they call it, a war or a jihad against the Shiites, and they portray it as a fight, Sunni-Shia fight.
Having been there recently, how intense is the feeling of sectarian division in the country right now between the Sunni minority and the Shia majority?
It depends where you are in the country. In the urban cities, you don't hear much about it, but in certain areas that's been tense or been neglected, you hear a lot about that. Also, in which group you belong to. If you belong to a certain political group or certain political party, then you certainly people align themselves with these political parties. That's always sectarian, or depends on which sect that they are from. On a daily basis, you see life is normal, but you see a lot of also suffering. Depends which area you are in, whether you are Sunni or a Shiite.
Do you, just to be clear, the origin of the group that is now terrorizing much of Iraq, ISIS, they were formed in the cauldron of violence and chaos that was the American occupation in the country. I mean, they did not exist before the American invasion and occupation happened.
Well, they used to have roots in Iraq, and but after the fall of Saddam's regime, their tactics have changed. Before, when Saddam was in power, they came to certain parts of Iraq and tried to spread their ideologies in terms of how they control women and how to cover them, and men as well, with their Salafi jihadist ideology. But Saddam's power was much more strong, and they could control them at that time. After the fall of Saddam's regime, they formed especially they are when the government become mainly Shiite, so these kind of their acts become more as a holy war or a jihad against the Shiites, because they do not align with the same ideology that they have. Now, in recent months, or in the past couple of years, they get more stronger in fighting in Syria.
Yes, because the Syrian jihad there has so exploded across the border between Iraq and Syria.
Exactly, and this Iraq was took a part of it, and the Iraqi government sent people to fight there. So it's become more a clear picture for people that they want to get back. I think with the resistance that happening in Ramadi and Fallujah in the past last year until now, that also took place, and the failure of the Iraqi government in terms of overcoming that, and led into what we have right now, in terms of that they didn't really communicate with them
or bring them into
clearly,
the
or bring
fold.
them into
Zainab
that.
Al-Sawaj from the American Islamic Congress, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Coming up, former Congressman Barney Frank will join me to talk about how he got into this mess in the first place, plus a guaranteed winner in the category of most awkward thing you've heard all day, NPR's Terry Gross interviewing Hillary Clinton.
I have to say, I think you are being very persistent, but you are playing with my words and playing with what is such an important issue.
I'm just trying to clarify so I can understand.
No, I don't think you are trying to clarify.
I'll tell you what they were talking about. We'll play the whole exchange ahead.